Good morning. My name is Bishop Christopher M. Tillman Sr., and I am a member of the United Christian Leadership Ministry. I'd like to introduce our president, Reverend Lewis Stewart, and he will be our chief spokesperson for today. Reverend Stewart.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. The past events involving Brenda Hardaway's brutalization by Officer Lucas Kroll and the nonsensical raising of her bail, tripling it, in fact, by Judge Affronti, sends a clear message to the African American community and others that we have no rights that the police and the court system are bound to respect. Therefore, we will explore the following avenues to obtain redress. One, we're going to be looking at initiating a petition drive demanding and calling for the Department of Justice to investigate the violation of Ms. Hardaway's civil rights and also the rights of others in our community. For too long, the police have been acting like rogues, doing what they want to do, just rousting people. And we understand that this whole stop and frisk thing that they had in New York City was overturned. The thing is that we need to deal with that whole issue here. We can't continue for this to happen. Secondly, we demand that City Council investigate the incident involving Officer Kroll. The City Council has independent investigative power. The City Council has subpoena authority to launch a probe into this parody of injustice. These political leaders need to stand for what is just and right and not to remain silent. And my question is, we have people running for mayor, we have people running for city council. Why have they been so silent on this particular issue? They need to stand up and to be counted. And then we are looking at filing a complaint against State Supreme Court Justice Affronti based upon his racist handling of Ms. Hardaway's bail. He does not possess the judicial temperament to be fair and impartial. He has already determined Ms. Hardaway's guilt. So therefore, how can he sit upon the bench or be allowed to sit upon the bench and remain a judge? I've heard none of his colleagues come forth and reprimand him because of his statement. And the statement being in the DNC that not only has he given her a Class D felony based upon the so-called violation of the law that she committed, but the fact is that she might have a run-in with some police officer down the road. So therefore, now he's playing Gandalf. He's Merlin the magician. He can see into the future and predict Miss Hardaway's future actions. This is in the realm of speculation. This is not law. This is sorcery. And so therefore, that's why he needs to be called upon the carpet. And thank you. Any questions?
Whisper, listen, whisper, say we're free. Rumors flying, must be lying, can it really be? Can't conceive it, can't believe it, but that's what they say. Slave no longer, this is Freedom Day. Freedom Day, it's Freedom Day. Throw those shackling chains away.
Can you comment a little bit? You mentioned you're going to be looking into some civil rights violations. Explain to me where you feel that her civil rights have been violated.
Well, the fact is the police allege that some pepper spray was used. And according to the videos that we have seen no use of pepper spray. In fact, when Officer Kroll confronted her, he had her hands behind her back. That was in the video, clearly in the video. Her hands were behind her back. Then we clearly saw in the video where he punched her in the back of the head while her hands were behind her back, and then wrestled her and threw her to the ground as though this was a Worldwide Wrestling Federation championship. This is ridiculous. And not only was it ridiculous, it was racist. And because of the fact that he assaulted her person is a violation of her civil rights.
The Hardaways have yet to file any formal complaint with the Rochester Police Department, which is currently making their internal investigation remarkably difficult. Have you counseled the Hardaways in any capacity to file that complaint so that way the police department can really move forward?
I have spoken with the Hardaways. I've asked them if there's anything that we can do to help them out, that we would do so. So that's where I prefer to leave it at right now. Thank you.
Well, when do you plan on doing all these complaints and things like that?
As soon as possible, immediately.
I was just...
Because, you know, we received a complaint just a few minutes ago from one of our ministers that he was at his house and one of his sons were on the porch and the police came by and they said they heard gunshots and they came on this gentleman's property and tried to arrest this young man for what? For nothing, for being black. So now not only is it black while driving, but it's black while standing still. It's black while sitting on your porch. This is getting out of hand. It really is. And we have got to stop it.
What do you say to the people who say this wasn't about race? Some people look at the video and say she was resisting arrest.
Mm-hmm.
There's video of her, you know, it looks like she's resisting arrest to a lot of people. What do you say to those people
Well,
who say this isn't about race?
I say this. Most of the people who say that it's not about race tend to be people of European extract anyway. You see, we as African Americans and Puerto Rican people look at the situation from the bottom up. They always look at it from the top down. Whereas we see an experience that is rooted and grounded in the violence of slavery and the repression of black people, they see it as a right of police authority to do what they want to do and to run amok in the community. The fact is that she may have violated the police procedure. That's not for us to say. The only thing we saw was him abusing, misusing, and physically mistreating a pregnant black woman. That's what we saw. Now, do not think that just because the police have the right to arrest, a lot of times and many times and often they misuse and abuse their authority. They don't speak to you in a respectful manner. Their personality, it borders on the KKK or the Nazis. They do things that they feel that they can trample on the rights of others, and we can't allow that any longer. That's got to be stopped.
Are there any plans for like public demonstrations? And if so, where can people find out about those?
We're looking at that. They can find out about that by calling 585-451-6982. But we're not at liberty to say right now because, as you know, relative to public demonstrations, a lot of planning and organizing needs to go into it ahead of time. Any other questions? This whole thing about community police relations for the past several years has really fallen on hard times. This whole issue about police community relations needs to be revived again. It needs to be looked at from a training point of view relative to Black and Puerto Rican people. The police do not have the authority to do what they're doing in this community just to end crime. We know we have crime in the community. We know that. We know that certainly we're tired of the violence too. We're tired of the homicide rate also. You know, I mean, it's just not police violence, but it's the violence that comes from these petty criminals and others disrespecting life and devaluing life in our community. But since the police have the law enforcement power and the authority to hold a gun, you see, they should be held more accountable, because basically they are an arm of the government. See, the whole thing with the punch in the back of the head was that he could have killed this woman by punching her in the back of the head. She could have had an aneurysm by being punched in the back of the head. Then what would have happened then? They would have then blamed it on her and saying that she was at fault. But the fact is that Officer Kroll, he acted like a thug, he acted like a criminal. And this whole thing with this double standard is the issue of this. Why is she arrested and he not arrested? Because he's a police officer? That's the issue. Why is it that he gets away with assaulting her and throwing her to the ground? I mean, really actually wrestling with this pregnant woman, and he gets away with what? Perhaps a slap on the wrist and not even that? No one has called this officer into account. We have heard nothing of that. And Police Chief Shepard, he needs to address these issues, and I hope that lovely Warren looks at getting a new chief of police when she assumes office in her new term. Because clearly Shepard is ineffective, he's a politician, and he needs to be dismissed. And the other issue is, what if it was a black police officer who did the same scenario with a white woman? What do you think would have happened? Let's put on our thinking caps now. This officer would have been held up on charges if it had been a white woman. If it had happened in Greece, if it had happened in Brighton, oh, there would have been hell to pay against this black officer. But Kroll thinks that he can do anything he wants, and his attitude represents a lot of officers' attitude. They can run roughshod with impunity in our community and get away with anything they want to get away with. And it's the same thing with Affronti. Now, years ago, there was an incident in which a police officer who was high, who was on alcohol, ran into a stalled car and hit a woman who was pregnant. Now, what did Judge Affronti do?
Let him go.
He released him without bail. Think about that. He released him without bail. And now this so-called judge gives Brenda Hardaway $7,500 in bail, and then he triples it. So we have a mayoral candidate here, Mr. Alex White, and maybe he could share something relative to this incident, what he would do as mayor.
One of the real problems here, more than anything else, is the policy of the department condones this sort of activity. This isn't just a rogue cop at this point. This is the procedures and policies of the department support this sort of actions. And until we get a chief in there that is going to change that, to make it so that the officers treat people with respect, we're going to have the problem like we did here, in that a domestic dispute was basically over when the police arrived. And the police presence created such a conflict that it blew it up into the fact that people ended up getting arrested, people got assaulted, and that assault was mainly done by the police. We need to change the way that our police act in these situations. We need to implement it as a policy, and that their job is to de-escalate these problems. Because far too often I see incidences of young men in particular, or young women, being arrested in which the major crime against them was resisting arrest. And that there is no real charge for why they were being arrested, other than the fact that they're resisting. And that is the case in this situation as well. And until we correct those policies, we're going to have this unconstitutional stop and frisk. And if elected mayor, one of the first things I will do is change this by changing the chief of the police and getting rid of Shepard. His last day is my first day, and we are going to review and overturn the policies that have led to many of the problems in our black community.
We want to thank all of you for showing up, and we want to thank Pastor Willie Harvey especially for allowing us to have this press conference here at Peace Baptist Church. We want to thank all the ministers that have showed up in support. We can't forget these things are not just relegated to one incident, all right? We're talking about a history of certain tactics in Rochester, New York. Minister Craddock speaking about what happened to his son last night. Mr. Luria has a history of different things going on. So we're going to end it right now just on the tone of we do expect change. This is not a knee-jerk reaction. We're not giving ultimatums. And our president has clearly stated the 4 major terms of what we're looking for as outcomes from our actions that we will be taking. So we thank you very much.
We're just not here to sell wolf tickets. We're here to implement change. Thank you.